Someone is watching me. The certainty settles into my bones like winter cold as I guide my students through the afternoon signing exercise in St. Catherine's courtyard. 12 small faces turn toward me with varying degrees of concentration, their hands moving through the shapes I have spent 3 years teaching them to form, but my attention keeps drifting to the black SUV parked across the street. It has been there every day for 2 weeks now, appearing like clockwork when I bring the children outside, its tinted windows revealing nothing of whoever sits within. I force my focus back to the lesson, demonstrating the sign for sunshine as actual sunlight warms my shoulders, but the prickle at the back of my neck refuses to fade. My life is small and careful, and deliberately so. I wake at 6 in my studio apartment with its secondhand furniture and walls covered in student artwork. I take the bus to St. Catherine's School for the Deaf because my car is older than some of my students and unreliable on cold mornings. I teach until the light turns golden, then grade papers until my eyes ache, then sleep and begin again. There is no room in this routine for mysterious vehicles and invisible observers. There is no reason anyone should be watching me at all. Yet the SUV remains. I catch movement from my peripheral vision and turn to find Sophia Ravenscroft tugging at my sleeve. She arrived 2 weeks ago, the same time as the SUV, though I have tried not to connect those facts into something that frightens me. She is 6 years old with dark hair and darker eyes that hold more caution than any child's should. Her enrollment paperwork listed a guardian named Mrs. Chen, an address in the wealthy part of the city, and nothing else. No emergency contact, no medical history beyond what was required. Sophia herself offered even less, spending her first week watching from corners, flinching when other children moved too quickly near her. I knelt to her level on her third day and signed slowly, patiently, asking nothing and demanding nothing, simply showing her that someone would meet her in the silence where she lived. By the second week, she started signing back. Now she looks up at me with something breaking open in her expression, her small hands rising to form the words I have taught her to speak without sound. I love you. The signs are perfect. Her face transforms with the courage it took to offer them. My throat tightens with an emotion I cannot name. Something between pride and sorrow and a fierce protective surge that reminds me of my brother. Of standing beside his hospital bed and promising to spend my life in service of children who needed someone to see them. I sign back. I love you too. And Sophia's smile is worth every exhausting hour, every sacrifice, every choice that led me here. Behind her, across the street, the SUV's window lowers 2 inches. I see the shadow of a jaw, the suggestion of eyes fixed directly on us, on Sophia's hands, on the love she just declared. Then the window rises and the SUV pulls away, and I am left with sunshine on my shoulders and ice in my veins, wondering what kind of man watches his child from the shadows, and why he has now started watching me too. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel, and comment where you are watching from, and what time is it? It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. The SUV pulls away from St. Catherine's, and I watch through the tinted rear window as Eleanor Fairfax kneels to embrace another child, her auburn hair catching the afternoon light like something precious, something I have no right to covet. Marcus drives in silence because he knows better than to speak when I am like this, when the hollow space behind my ribs aches with something I cannot name and refuse to examine. 2 weeks I have watched her. 2 weeks of sitting in this vehicle like a ghost, haunting the edges of my daughter's new life, unable to cross the threshold into the world where Sophia laughs and learns and apparently loves. I love you. My daughter's small hands form those words with such ease, such natural grace, offering them to a woman she has known for 14 days when she has never once offered them to me. The knowledge should burn with jealousy, but instead it cracks something open. something frozen so long I forgot it could still break. Sophia was born in blood and silence, her mother hemorrhaging on a table while doctors shouted and machines screamed, and I stood helpless in a hallway, making the only choice I have ever regretted and never regretted simultaneously. Choose one, they said, and I chose my daughter, and my wife died with my name on her lips, and Sophia emerged into a world she would never hear. The guilt of that night lives in my chest like a second heartbeat. I built an empire on violence and fear and calculated ruthlessness, yet I cannot build a bridge to my own child. I do not know the language she speaks. I have hired tutors and specialists, and the finest educators money can intimidate into service. But I myself have never learned, too proud or too afraid or too convinced that my blood-stained hands have no business forming words of tenderness. Then Eleanor Fairfax walked into my daughter's classroom and within 2 weeks accomplished what 6 years of my wealth could not. She taught Sophia to say I love you, and more importantly, she made Sophia want to say it. My phone buzzes and Marcus glances at me through the rearview mirror as I check the message, his jaw tight with unspoken warnings. Victor Ashworth, the text reads, followed by coordinates and surveillance photos. My former partner turned bitter enemy has been moving pieces on the board again, positioning his men closer to my territory, testing boundaries I will paint red with his blood if he crosses. I should care about this. I should be strategizing countermoves and fortifying weaknesses and doing the 100 things that keep my syndicate dominant and my daughter safe. Instead, I am thinking about auburn hair and sunlight, and the way Eleanor's hands moved when she signed back to Sophia, fluid and beautiful and patient, in a way I have never learned to be. Who is this woman who lives in a modest apartment, and rides the bus, and spends her evenings grading papers for children who will never hear her voice? Who is this woman my daughter loves? I need to know her. The realization settles into my bones with the weight of inevitability, dangerous and certain. I need to meet Eleanor Fairfax, and I need her to teach me the language my daughter speaks, and I need to understand why watching her feels like standing at the edge of a cliff I have been walking toward my entire life. Marcus will tell me this is foolish. Marcus will remind me that attachments are vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities get people killed. Marcus is not wrong. But Sophia signed I love you today, and I want to be able to answer her. And if that means stepping out of the shadows and into the light where Eleanor Fairfax lives and teaches and transforms broken children into something whole, then I will do what I have always done. I will take what I want and manage the consequences later. The building settles around me with the groans and sighs of old architecture as I sort through construction paper and organize tomorrow's lesson materials. The other teachers long gone to their evening lives, while I remain in my classroom surrounded by student artwork and the particular silence of empty hallways. I prefer it this way sometimes, the solitude after hours of vibrant communication, my hands finally still after a day of constant motion. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, and outside the windows, the sky has turned the color of bruises, purple and blue and threatening rain, and I am so focused on laminating vocabulary cards that I almost miss the sound of footsteps in the corridor. Almost. They are measured and deliberate, expensive shoes on industrial tile, nothing like the squeaking sneakers of children or the sensible flats of my colleagues. I freeze with a sheet of paper halfway to the laminator, my pulse suddenly loud in my ears. And I think of the black SUV and its invisible occupant, and I wonder if I should have listened to the instinct that has been screaming at me for 2 weeks to pay attention, to be afraid. The footsteps stop. I look up. A man fills my doorway like he was carved to fit it, tall and broad-shouldered in a suit that costs more than 3 months of my rent. His face is all sharp angles and shadows, dark hair swept back from a forehead that speaks of sleepless nights, eyes the color of winter ice fixed on me with an intensity that makes my skin prickle. He is beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful, in the way of storms and predators and edges you know better than to touch. I should speak. I should demand to know who he is, and what he wants, and why he is standing in my classroom after hours like he owns it, like he owns everything. But my voice has abandoned me somewhere between my chest and my throat, and all I can do is stare at this stranger who does not feel like a stranger at all. I am Sophia's father, he says, and his voice is low and controlled and carries the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Confusion cuts through my fear because Sophia's paperwork clearly lists Mrs. Chen as her guardian, and I open my mouth to say so, but he continues before I can form the words. Security reasons, he says, as if that explains everything. As if wealthy men regularly hide their relationships to their own children behind false names and proxy guardians. I want to learn sign language. The request lands between us like something fragile and unexpected. He wants lessons, he explains, private instruction, because he needs to communicate with his daughter, and he has heard I am the best. There is something beneath his cold composure, something that flickers in those ice-colored eyes when he speaks of Sophia. And despite every instinct telling me this man is dangerous, despite the way my heart pounds with warning, I see it. Vulnerability. A father standing in a doorway asking to learn the language his daughter speaks. A man who has watched from shadows because he does not know how to step into light. I should say no. I should protect myself from whatever darkness follows him. Instead, I hear myself agreeing, and when his expression shifts with something like relief, I feel the first treacherous spark of attraction and crush it immediately beneath the weight of my own common sense. He arrives precisely at 7 in the evening, 3 days after that first encounter in my doorway, and I watch him enter my classroom like a man walking into enemy territory, all controlled wariness and coiled tension. The school is empty again, the hallways dark except for the light spilling from my room, and I have arranged 2 chairs facing each other with a small table between them, a setup I use for one-on-one instruction that suddenly feels far too intimate with Alexander Ravenscroft lowering himself into the seat across from me. He looks wrong here among the colorful posters and children's artwork, his dark suit and dangerous elegance clashing with the cheerful chaos of my teaching space, and yet when his eyes find the drawing Sophia made of a butterfly that I pinned to my board, something in his jaw softens almost imperceptibly. "We should begin," he says, and I nod and launch into my standard introduction about hand positioning and facial expression and the importance of body language in sign, speaking too quickly because his proximity makes my skin feel electric, and I need the safety of professionalism between us. I demonstrate the sign for hello, simple and clean, and he mimics it with the focused intensity of someone accustomed to mastering whatever he attempts, but his movements are too sharp, too controlled, lacking the fluid grace that makes signing feel like language rather than mere gesture. "Your fingers," I say, and before I can stop myself, I am reaching across the space between us and adjusting his hand, and the contact sends a jolt through my nervous system that I struggle to hide. His hands are large and warm and marked with violence, his knuckles bearing the pale scars of old fights, and his wrist encircled by a watch that probably costs more than my car. And I wonder what these hands have done, and how I can still feel the ghost of his skin against my fingertips when I pull away. Goodbye comes easier to him, and he practices it twice without prompting while I try to remember how to breathe normally. "Now I want you to learn the sign for I love you," I tell him. Because it was what Sophia signed to me. Because it is what he came here to understand. And I show him the combined hand shape that means those 3 words in a single gesture. He watches my demonstration with absolute attention, and then lifts his own hand and tries to form it, but something happens to his face, a fracture in that cold composure, and his hand trembles almost invisibly before he lowers it. Again, he says roughly, and I show him again, and he tries again, and this time he holds the shape, but his eyes have gone distant and haunted, and I realize with sudden clarity that he has not said these words in years, perhaps not since his wife died, perhaps not ever to his daughter. The moment stretches between us, fragile and heavy, and then his phone shatters it with a sharp buzz that makes me flinch. He answers without apology, his voice dropping into something cold and businesslike, and I hear fragments about handling a situation and making sure it does not happen again, and the chill that runs down my spine has nothing to do with the evening air coming through my window. When he ends the call and looks at me, whatever vulnerability I glimpsed has been locked away behind ice, and I am left wondering what kind of man I have agreed to teach. I spend my lunch break hunched over my phone in the teacher's lounge, searching Alexander Ravenscroft's name with fingers that tremble slightly as I scroll through result after result, and what I find makes my stomach clench into a cold knot. The articles are careful, full of allegedly and reportedly and sources claim, but the picture they paint is unmistakable. Ravenscroft Industries sits at the center of a web that stretches across the city, legitimate businesses on the surface with shadows underneath that journalists hint at but never quite illuminate. There are photos of him at charity galas and business conferences, always impeccably dressed, always with eyes that give nothing away, and in every image he radiates the kind of power that makes other men step aside. One article from 3 years ago mentions his wife's death in passing, a tragedy during childbirth, and another references ongoing investigations that never seem to produce charges. Organized crime, the words, whisper from between the careful lines. Dangerous. Run. I close my browser and stare at the wall and try to convince myself that I should cancel our next lesson, should protect myself from whatever darkness swirls around this man. But then the afternoon bell rings and my students flood in, and Sophia is among them, her face brightening when she sees me, with a smile that feels like sunshine breaking through clouds. She runs to me as she always does, small arms wrapping around my waist in a hug that I return automatically. And that is when I feel her flinch and see her wince, and my blood turns to ice. I kneel to her level and gently push up her sleeve, and there they are, purple bruises circling her thin arm like fingerprints, and something inside me transforms from fear into fury. The rest of the day passes in a haze of protective rage, and when the final bell rings, I am waiting by the pickup area, watching for the black SUV with its tinted windows, and the monster I now believe sits behind them. Alexander steps out himself today, rather than sending his driver, and I intercept him before he can reach the school entrance, my voice low and shaking, as I demand to know what happened to his daughter. His expression shifts from confusion to understanding to something volcanic, and he grips my elbow and steers me away from curious eyes with a controlled urgency that frightens me almost as much as the bruises did. She fell, he says through clenched teeth, while my men were moving her to safety during an incident at the house. I would never hurt her. Never. The word cracks with an emotion I did not expect from him, and I see in his winter eyes a father's desperation to be believed. I ask what incident, and he hesitates, walls rising, but I stand firm and tell him I need truth if he expects me to keep teaching his daughter. He looks at me for a long moment, and then speaks words that reshape my understanding of everything. I have enemies, he says. Powerful ones. Sophia is protected at all times because she is my weakness and they know it. Anyone close to her becomes a target. I think of the black SUV watching me for weeks. Think of the feeling of eyes on my skin. And I understand suddenly that the danger I sensed was never coming from Alexander at all. It was coming for him. And now perhaps for me too. And I must decide whether to run from this child I have come to love or stay in the crossfire of a war I never chose. The parking garage is nearly empty when I finally leave the school, my footsteps echoing against concrete walls in a rhythm that sounds too loud in the silence, and I am so lost in thought about Alexander's warning and Sophia's bruises and the tangled mess my life has become that I do not notice the men until they are already on me. A hand clamps over my mouth from behind, while another arm locks around my waist, and I am lifted off my feet as easily as if I weigh nothing, my scream dying against rough fingers that taste like cigarettes in violence. I fight with everything I have, kicking backward and clawing at the arms restraining me, and I manage to bite down hard enough to draw blood and hear a curse in a language I do not recognize, before something hits the side of my head and the world goes white with pain. They are dragging me toward a van with its doors already open, a dark mouth waiting to swallow me whole. And I think about Sophia and how she will wonder where I went, and whether anyone will tell her the truth, and then the night explodes into thunder and fire. Gunshots crack through the garage like the world splitting open, and the men holding me scatter as two figures emerge from the shadows with weapons raised, and even through my terror I recognize Alexander moving with a lethal grace that transforms him from the struggling student in my classroom to something ancient and predatory. He does not hesitate. He does not warn. He simply aims and fires, and a man drops 3 feet from me with a hole where his face used to be, and I watch Alexander Ravenscroft kill with the same focused intensity he brought to learning the sign for I love you. Marcus handles the others while Alexander reaches me, his free hand gripping my arm to pull me behind a concrete pillar, as return fire sparks off the walls around us, and in the chaos I see blood blooming across his shoulder, dark against his darker suit. The fight ends as quickly as it began, bodies on the ground and silence rushing back in, and then Alexander is cupping my face in his hands and asking if I am hurt, and his eyes are wild with something that looks like fear, which seems impossible for a man who just killed without flinching. I should be screaming. I should be running from him. Instead, I notice the wound on his shoulder, and my hands move without permission, pressing against the torn fabric to stop the bleeding while he watches me with an expression I cannot name. In the car afterward, speeding through streets I do not recognize with Marcus driving and Alexander bleeding beside me, he tells me about Victor Ashworth. Former partner, betrayal, blood debt, a man who will burn everything Alexander cares about to ash. Those men wanted leverage, he says, and his voice is rough with pain and something else. You matter to Sophia. His jaw tightens. And to me, he starts to say, then stops himself, but the words hang in the air between us anyway, changing everything. And I understand that my simple life of teaching and quiet evenings died in that parking garage alongside the men who tried to take me. I refuse at first, because agreeing feels like surrender, like admitting that my life is no longer my own. But Alexander pulls out his phone and shows me photographs that turn my blood to ice. My apartment building from across the street, my bedroom window with the light on, me walking to the corner market 3 nights ago, completely unaware of the lens tracking my every step. Victor Ashworth's men have been watching me for weeks, he says, and his voice carries no triumph at being right, only grim certainty. I can protect you, or I can bury you. Those are the only options left. So I pack a bag with hands that shake and I climb into the black SUV that has haunted my peripheral vision for so long. And I watch the city, I know, disappear behind tinted windows as we drive toward the outskirts where the houses grow larger and the walls grow higher and the world I understood grows smaller with every mile. The Ravenscroft estate rises from manicured grounds like a fortress pretending to be a home, all gray stone and gleaming windows, and a silence so complete it presses against my ears. Inside is marble and dark wood and artwork that probably costs more than I will earn in my entire lifetime. And a woman in a crisp uniform shows me to a room that could swallow my entire apartment without noticing. The bed is vast and soft. The bathroom has heated floors. The window overlooks gardens that stretch toward distant trees, and when I test the handle, I find it locked from the outside. A gilded cage, I think, and something in my chest tightens until I cannot breathe. Then the door bursts open, and Sophia flies across the room and crashes into my arms with a force that nearly knocks me backward, her small hands signing so fast I can barely follow. You are here. You are staying. I am so happy. I hold her tight and breathe in the strawberry scent of her shampoo and feel my prison walls shift into something more complicated. Because how can I resent the bars when they keep this child smiling? Dinner is served in a formal dining room where Alexander sits at the head of a table long enough to seat 20, and the distance between us feels intentional. A reminder that I am guest and prisoner both, but never equal. He is different here in his domain, colder somehow, more controlled, as if the walls themselves reinforce the armor he wears against the world. I ask him how he can live like this, surrounded by violence and fear and locked doors, and he studies me over the rim of his wineglass with eyes that give nothing away. I ask him what kind of life this is for a child. He sets down his glass with a precision that speaks of barely leashed anger and tells me this life is the only reason his child is still alive. We finish the meal in silence. That night, I lie in sheets that cost more than my monthly rent and listen to footsteps patrol past my door at regular intervals, guards whose presence should make me feel safe, but only reminds me that safety here is conditional, dependent on walls and weapons and a man who kills without hesitation. I think about Sophia's joy at seeing me, about Alexander's wounded eyes when I challenged him, about the photographs of my apartment and the men who took them. I think about choices and cages, and whether there is any real difference between the two when the alternative is death. Days blur together inside these walls until I lose track of how long I have been here, measuring time instead by Sophia's lessons and the guards' shift changes and the way afternoon light slants through the library windows where I have claimed a corner as my own. I teach Sophia in a sunny room on the second floor that Alexander had converted into a classroom just for her, with small desks and colorful posters and a rug soft enough for sitting during story time, and I pretend not to notice him watching from doorways with an expression that hovers somewhere between hunger and hope. He thinks he is invisible when he observes us, thinks I cannot feel his gaze tracking my hands as I shape words from air. But I always know when he is there, because the temperature of the room seems to shift, the very atmosphere growing denser with his presence. One evening, I wander the halls unable to sleep and find his study door ajar, golden light spilling across the hardwood, and I pause when I see him standing before a mirror with his hands raised. He is practicing. Alone in the quiet of midnight, this man who commands an empire of shadows and violence is clumsily forming the sign for daughter over and over, his scarred fingers struggling with the delicate motion, and something inside my chest cracks open at the sight. The next afternoon, I invite him to join our lesson instead of lurking at the threshold, and the fear that flickers across his face before he masters it tells me everything about the walls he has built around his heart. Sophia's confusion melts into delight when her father settles onto the rug beside her, his expensive suit absurd against the cheerful colors, and I guide his hands through simple signs while his daughter watches with eyes that shine like stars. They sign hello to each other. They sign happy. And when Sophia raises her small hands to form, I love you, and Alexander mirrors the gesture back to her with trembling fingers, the sound she makes is not quite a word, but carries more meaning than any language could hold. I see him blink rapidly, see him turn his face away for just a moment, and I pretend to organize flashcards so he can compose himself without witness. Later that night, he finds me in his study with a bottle of whiskey that probably costs more than my car, and 2 glasses already poured, and I should refuse, but I am tired of shoulds, so I drink and let the warmth spread through my chest. He tells me about Sophia's mother, about the emergency room and the hemorrhaging, and the doctor who made him choose because they could not save them both. He chose his daughter and held his wife's hand while she died, and has not forgiven himself for either. I tell him about my brother Daniel, about watching him fade from leukemia when I was 17 and he was only 12, about how his hands kept signing jokes until the very end because laughter was the only medicine left. We sit in silence after that, 2 people hollowed out by grief, and when our fingers brush reaching for the bottle, neither of us pulls away. The alarm tears through my sleep like a blade, a shrieking wail that sends me tumbling from the bed with my heart already racing before my mind catches up to what is happening. Red lights pulse in the hallway outside my door, and I hear shouting, footsteps pounding, and then Alexander is there in my doorway, with a gun in his hand, and blood already speckling his white shirt, though I do not know whose. Sophia, he says, just her name, and I understand. We run together through corridors that have become a maze of flashing crimson and shadow, and I scoop Sophia from her bed where she sits frozen with terror she cannot hear, but can feel in the vibrations shaking the walls, in the fear written across her father's face. Alexander leads us downstairs I have never seen before, through a door hidden behind a bookcase like something from a Gothic novel, and into a room that feels like a tomb, all steel walls and reinforced doors and monitors showing grainy footage of men in black moving across the grounds. He kneels before Sophia and signs "Stay with Eleanor. I will come back. I promise." And the way his hands shake as he forms the words breaks something inside me. Then he looks at me, and there is so much in that gaze, words he cannot say, feelings he will not name, and he is gone before I can respond, the heavy door sealing behind him with a sound like a coffin closing. The gunfire starts moments later. I hold Sophia against my chest and feel her small body trembling, and I sign into the space between us. Stories and songs and silly jokes, anything to keep her eyes on my hands instead of the door, anything to drown out the muffled thunder of violence happening somewhere above our heads. She signs back, asking if her daddy is okay, asking if the bad men will hurt us, asking why people want to make them sad, and I have no answers that are not lies, so I just hold her tighter and promise that I will keep her safe, that I will never let anyone hurt her, that we are going to be fine. The minutes stretch into hours, or maybe it is only seconds, time losing all meaning in this bunker where the only reality is Sophia's heartbeat against my ribs and the distant sounds of a war being fought for our survival. I think about Alexander out there in the darkness, this man I should hate, this criminal, this killer, and I realize that my fear is not just for myself and this child in my arms. I am terrified for him. I am terrified of a world where he does not come back through that door. The realization should shock me, but instead it settles into my bones like a truth I have been running from since the first moment he appeared in my classroom doorway. The door opens. Alexander stands there covered in blood, his shirt torn, a gash across his cheekbone that will definitely scar, but alive, breathing, whole. "Threat neutralized," he says, and his voice is steady but his eyes find mine and hold on like I am the only solid thing in a world gone liquid. Sophia has fallen asleep in my arms, exhausted by terror, and he looks at us tangled together on the cold floor of his panic room, and something in his expression crumbles. "You should hate me," he says quietly, "for bringing this into your life, for putting you in danger, for everything I am." I look at this man who kills without hesitation and holds his daughter like she is made of glass. This contradiction wrapped in expensive suits and old grief, and I tell him the truth. I should, I say. But I do not. Sleep refuses to come no matter how many times I rearrange the pillows, or count my breaths, or try to quiet the chaos inside my skull. So eventually I surrender and wrap myself in a silk robe that costs more than my monthly rent, and wander the darkened hallways of this fortress that has become my strange new world. The library calls to me with its floor-to-ceiling shelves and leather chairs and the faint smell of old paper that has always meant safety, and I curl into a window seat with a book I cannot focus on, watching moonlight paint silver patterns across the manicured grounds below. I do not hear him approach, but I feel him, that shift in the air that happens whenever Alexander enters a room. And when I look up, he is standing in the doorway in a white shirt unbuttoned at the throat and dark trousers, his feet bare, his hair disheveled, looking more human than I have ever seen him. "You cannot sleep either," he says, and it is not a question. He crosses to the window and stands close enough that I can smell whiskey and something darker, something that might be gunpowder, still lingering from the violence of yesterday. We talk about fear, about the way it burrows into your bones and makes a home there, about how some nights are too heavy for rest. We talk about choices and consequences and the strange paths that lead us to places we never expected to stand. He asks what I will do when this ends, when Victor is dealt with and the danger passes, and the question opens a hollow space in my chest because I have not let myself think about after, about returning to my small apartment and my normal life and a world where he is not standing close enough to touch. I tell him I do not know, and the words feel like a confession. He moves closer. I do not retreat. The moonlight catches the sharp angles of his face and the dark depth of his eyes, and I think about all the reasons this is madness, all the blood on his hands, all the ways this man represents everything I should run from, but my body does not seem to care about should, and when he lifts his hand to brush a strand of hair from my face, my skin ignites beneath his fingers. The kiss happens like a storm breaking, sudden and violent and inevitable, his mouth claiming mine with a desperation that matches the hunger I have been denying for weeks. He tastes like whiskey and danger, and something sweeter underneath, something wounded and wanting, and my hands fist in his shirt, pulling him closer, even as my mind screams warnings I cannot hear over the thunder of my pulse. I break away gasping, pressing my palm against his chest where his heart pounds as frantically as mine. This is insane, I tell him. You are dangerous. I am not this person. He looks at me with eyes that hold more vulnerability than I thought him capable of, and admits he does not know who he is around me. We agree to maintain distance, professional, appropriate, safe. The agreement lasts approximately 12 hours before I find him in the hallway outside my room, and he finds the last of my resistance crumbling into dust. The package arrives during breakfast, delivered by a guard whose face has gone pale beneath his professional composure, and I know before Alexander opens it that something terrible waits inside. He dismisses Sophia to her playroom with a gentle sign that belies the tension coiling through his shoulders. And only when she is gone does he slice through the brown paper wrapping with a knife he pulls from somewhere I did not see. Photographs spill across the polished mahogany table like poisoned confetti, and my stomach drops through the floor because the woman in those pictures is me. Me walking through the gates of St. Catherine's with my coffee in hand and my bag over my shoulder, unaware of the lens capturing my morning routine. Me in my apartment watering the plants on my windowsill, the shot taken from across the street with terrifying clarity. Me surrounded by my students in the courtyard, their faces blurred but mine in sharp focus, a target painted in photographic paper. There are dozens of them spanning weeks, maybe months, a chronicle of surveillance that began long before I knew Alexander Ravenscroft existed. The note is handwritten in elegant script that seems obscene given its message. Everyone you love will suffer for his sins. No signature, but none is needed. Alexander's face has become something carved from stone, cold and ancient and terrible. And when he looks at me, I see murder in his eyes, though not directed at me, never at me, but at the ghost of the man who sent this violation into his home. I demand answers, and this time I will not accept deflection or half-truths or the careful omissions he uses like shields. Tell me everything, I say, and my voice does not shake though my hands do. So he tells me. Victor Ashworth was his partner once, years ago when Alexander was younger and more willing to share power. They built an empire together, controlled territories, made fortunes in ways I do not want to examine too closely. But Victor wanted more. Always more. He tried to orchestrate Alexander's death, failed, lost everything in the war that followed. His wife, his territory, his standing. He has spent the last 7 years rebuilding, waiting, planning a revenge that has become his only reason for breathing. This is not business anymore, Alexander says quietly. This is obsession. He will burn everything I have ever touched to ashes and salt the earth where it stood. He will not stop until one of us is dead. I look at the photographs scattered across the table, evidence of how long I have been watched, how carefully Victor has catalogued my existence, and I understand finally that there is no door I can walk through that leads back to my old life. That woman in the pictures, the one with coffee and students and a small apartment full of plants, she is already gone. Running would only delay the inevitable. Victor knows my face, my routines, the people I care about. He would find me eventually, and I would die alone and afraid, far from the only people who might protect me. So I make my choice. I stay. The gymnasium in the East Wing has been converted into something that looks like a private training facility, all padded floors and mirrored walls and equipment I cannot name. And this is where Alexander begins teaching me how to survive. He starts with basic stances, how to root my weight into the ground so I cannot be easily toppled, how to keep my hands up to protect my face and throat, how to breathe through the panic that wants to freeze my limbs when danger approaches. His hands on my body are clinical at first, adjusting my posture, repositioning my arms, showing me where to strike for maximum damage. The heel of your palm to the nose, he says, demonstrating in slow motion. Fingers to the eyes if you can reach them. Knee to the groin. You are not trying to win a fight, you are trying to create space to run. I practice the movements until my muscles burn, until sweat plasters my shirt to my back, until the motions begin to feel less awkward and more instinctive. He does not go easy on me. When I fail to block his telegraphed strikes, he connects, gently but firmly enough that I understand what real impact would feel like. Learn from pain, he tells me. And I hear the echo of someone who learned that lesson young and hard. Marcus watches our sessions sometimes, leaning against the doorway with an expression I cannot quite read, and over the days I notice his coldness toward me beginning to thaw. He brings me water without being asked. He nods when I execute a particularly clean escape from a hold. One afternoon, he tells me that his boss has not laughed in 7 years, not until me, and the words feel like a gift and a warning wrapped together. I begin learning the household in ways that go beyond architecture, understanding the web of loyalties that hold this strange family together. The cook who came from Alexander's mother's village and has fed him since childhood. The head of security who took a bullet meant for Alexander's father 20 years ago. The drivers and guards and housekeepers who know exactly what their employer does and stay anyway because he treats them with a fairness rare in legitimate businesses, let alone criminal ones. They are not good people by the definitions I once held certain, but they are loyal people, honorable in their own code, and I find my rigid moral lines beginning to blur at the edges. In the evenings, I continue teaching Alexander signs, building his vocabulary beyond the basics into full conversations. His hands have grown confident, his movements fluid, and when Sophia joins us for dinner one night, he turns to her and signs, "I love you, little one," and her face transforms into something luminous. She launches herself at him, small arms wrapping around his neck, and over her shoulder, I see Alexander's eyes close, his expression cracked open with a joy so raw it feels sacred to witness. He holds his daughter and mouths, "Thank you" to me across the room, and I realize with a terror that has nothing to do with Victor Ashworth, that I am falling in love with both of them, this broken man and his beautiful child, this family that is not mine, but feels like it could be. The breach is traced to someone inside the walls, and the revelation spreads through the household like poison in water, invisible but deadly, changing everything it touches. I watch Alexander transform over the following days, the warmth I had begun to coax from him freezing over again into something cold and suspicious and terrifying in its remoteness. He takes meetings behind closed doors. He speaks in low voices with Marcus that stop the moment I enter a room. He looks at his own people with eyes that calculate betrayal, and when those eyes land on me, I see the same assessment happening, the same terrible mathematics of trust being recalculated. I tell myself he does not truly suspect me, but the distance he creates is its own kind of wound, a rejection that cuts deeper than I want to admit. Sophia feels it too, this new tension in her father, and she becomes withdrawn in ways that break my heart to witness. She stops running to him when he enters rooms. She watches him with careful eyes that no 6-year-old should possess, reading his moods the way children in dangerous homes learn to read the weather. I try to bridge the gap during our lessons, encouraging her to show him what she has learned, but he rarely joins us anymore, and his absences speak louder than any words. One evening, I find him in his study, and I do not knock, do not wait for permission, simply push through the door and stand before his desk with my arms crossed and my heart pounding. "You are pushing everyone away," I tell him, and my voice comes out harder than I intend. "You are punishing people who love you for the sins of whoever betrayed you." He looks up from the papers he has been studying, and his expression is carved from marble, beautiful and cold and utterly closed. "You do not understand this world," he says quietly. "Trust is a vulnerability I cannot afford. Everyone I have ever loved has died or betrayed me. My wife, my parents. Now someone in my own house sells my secrets to a man who wants my daughter dead. Tell me how I am supposed to remain open when openness gets people killed." The words hit me like physical blows because I hear the grief beneath them, the accumulated losses that have taught him this terrible arithmetic of the heart. But I do not retreat. "I am still here," I tell him, and I step closer, close enough to see the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "I have not betrayed you. I am not going anywhere. And Sophia needs her father, not this ghost you are becoming." Something cracks in his face, a fault line appearing in the stone. "You should go," he says, but his voice wavers. "You should take what I have given you, and run before I destroy you too." Instead of leaving, I close the distance between us and I kiss him, fierce and desperate and demanding. And after a moment of frozen surprise, he responds with a hunger that matches my own. We come together in his study with an urgency that borders on violence, years of his suppressed need meeting weeks of my building desire. Afterward, he holds me with hands that tremble slightly, and in the darkness, I see the man beneath the monster, wounded and wanting and terrified of hope. The door to Alexander's study crashes open and Marcus enters with a face like thunder, dragging behind him a figure I recognize with a jolt of confusion and horror. Mrs. Chen, the woman who brought Sophia to school each day, who signed the enrollment papers, who smiled at me with grandmotherly warmth while collecting her charge each afternoon. She looks smaller now, diminished, her careful composure shattered into something terrified and pleading. "I found the leak," Marcus says, and his voice carries a cold satisfaction that makes my stomach turn. "She has been passing information to Ashworth for 3 months. Security codes, schedules, everything." Alexander rises from his desk with a slowness that is somehow more frightening than speed, a predator uncoiling, and the temperature in the room drops 20 degrees. I watch his face transform into something I have not seen since the parking garage, since he killed a man without hesitation, and I understand that Mrs. Chen is about to die in this room unless something changes. "How much?" he asks quietly, and his voice is almost gentle, in a way that raises every hair on my body. "How much did he pay you to betray my daughter?" Mrs. Chen crumbles to her knees, words spilling out in a rush of terror and desperation. "He has my granddaughter," she sobs. "He took her 6 months ago and said he would send her back in pieces if I did not cooperate. I never wanted to hurt Sophia. I love that child. I had no choice." Alexander's hand moves toward his waistband, and I know with terrible certainty what comes next, the equation in his mind already solved. Betrayal equals death, regardless of circumstance. I move without thinking, stepping between them, placing my body in the path of his intent. "Wait," I say, and my voice comes out steady, despite the fear clawing at my chest. She was coerced. Her granddaughter is a victim too. There has to be another way. The look Alexander gives me could strip paint from walls, fury and disbelief and something darker I cannot name. You defend her? She put Sophia in danger. She put you in danger. Every attack, every breach traces back to her hands. I do not move. I know what she did. But killing her does not save her granddaughter, and it does not undo the damage. She has information we need. Victor is planning something bigger, and she might know what it is. The calculation shifts in his eyes, tactical reasoning warring with the need for blood, and I press my advantage. Let her tell us everything. Then send her somewhere Victor cannot reach, somewhere she cannot hurt us again. Mercy can be a weapon too. The silence stretches eternal. Then Alexander lowers his hand and nods once at Marcus, who hauls Mrs. Chen to her feet for interrogation. What she reveals over the next 2 hours is fragmentary, but damning. Victor is assembling forces for a major strike. He wants Alexander broken before he kills him, wants to take everything first. When they finally lead Mrs. Chen away to whatever fate awaits her far from here, I see Alexander's men watching their boss differently. Some with approval at his restraint, others with worry at what they perceive as weakness. And I wonder, standing in the wreckage of another betrayal, whether my influence will save him or destroy him. The decision is made in the war room, and I am not invited to witness it, only summoned afterward to Alexander's study, where he stands before the window with his back to me, his silhouette carved against the gray afternoon light, like a man already preparing to become a ghost. "We are moving against Victor tomorrow night," he says without turning, and his voice carries the flat certainty of someone who has weighed all options and found only one path forward. His compound, his men, his entire operation. We end this, or it ends us. I feel the words land in my chest like stones dropped into still water, ripples of fear spreading outward until my whole body trembles with them. I want to help, I tell him, stepping closer, needing him to see my face when I say it. I want to be there. He turns then, and the look he gives me could shatter glass, could stop hearts, a mixture of fury and terror and something desperately tender beneath it all. No, the word is absolute. You will stay here with Sophia in the maximum security safe room. Marcus will leave a team behind, the best men I have. You will wait, and you will be safe, and you will not argue with me about this. But I do argue because I cannot simply sit in a bunker while the man I love walks into a war he might not survive, and our voices rise until we are both shouting things we do not entirely mean. Accusations and fears and the raw, bleeding edges of love turn desperate. The fight ends when he crosses the room in 3 strides and takes my face in his hands and kisses me with a ferocity that tastes like goodbye. That night, he shows me everything I need to know. The panic button that will summon any surviving guards, the steel-reinforced walls of the safe room, the concealed door behind the bookshelf that leads to an escape tunnel emerging in the woods half a mile from the property. "If I do not come back," he says, and I press my fingers to his lips because I cannot bear to hear the rest. He moves my hand away gently and continues, "If I do not come back, you take Sophia and you run. The secondary safe house in Greenwich, Marcus knows it. You take my daughter and you disappear, and you build her a life far away from all of this. I refuse to accept this," I tell him, my voice cracking on the words. "I refuse to plan for a future without you in it." But he makes me memorize the protocols anyway, makes me repeat the codes and the routes until they are burned into my brain. And then we fall into bed together with a hunger that borders on violence, each touch a promise, each kiss a prayer. He maps my body like a man memorizing terrain he might never see again, and I cling to him like he is the only solid thing in a world gone liquid with fear. We do not sleep. We talk instead, whispered confessions in the darkness. all the things we might never get another chance to say. I tell him about my brother, about the guilt I still carry for not being able to save him. He tells me about his wife, about the moment the doctors made him choose, about the weight of that choice he has carried every day since. When dawn finally breaks through the curtains, I watch him dress for war, and I feel my heart crack along fault lines I did not know it possessed. He kisses Sophia goodbye while she still sleeps, and signs "I love you" over her peaceful face, then turns to me one final time. "Wait for me," he says simply. And against all odds and reason and the terrible mathematics of violence, I believe he will come back. The hours crawl past like wounded things, each minute stretching into an eternity of waiting and wondering and trying desperately to keep my fear from bleeding into Sophia's awareness. We sit together in the safe room with its steel-reinforced walls, and its filtered air and its terrible sense of being buried alive, and I teach her songs and sign language because it is the only thing I can think to do, the only way I know to build a bridge over the chasm of terror threatening to swallow us both. She learns the signs for twinkle and star and wonder, her small hands moving through the shapes with a concentration that breaks my heart, and I match her movements and smile and pretend that everything is fine while my mind races through calculations of time and distance and all the ways tonight could end in blood. 4 hours pass. Then 5. The panic button sits heavy in my pocket like a stone, like a promise, like the last resort I pray I will not need to use. Sophia's hands slow their movements, and she looks at me with those eyes that see too much for a child her age, and she signs the question I have been dreading. "Is Daddy okay?" I sign back that he is fine, that he is strong, that he will come home to us soon, and I hope she cannot read the lie beneath my certainty. She accepts my reassurance with the trust that children give to adults who have not yet failed them, and I feel the weight of that trust settle onto my shoulders alongside everything else I am carrying tonight. We continue with the songs because stopping would mean confronting the silence, and the silence is too full of gunfire and screaming and all the violence I cannot see, but can imagine with terrible clarity. Then the alarms shatter everything. Red lights strobe across the ceiling, and a siren wails through the speakers, and my blood turns to ice water in my veins. Because this is wrong, this is not supposed to happen. Alexander took the fight to Victor, so that the fight would not come here. But I understand with a sickening lurch of comprehension that I have been fooled. We have all been fooled. The raid on Victor's compound was never the real attack. It was the diversion. Victor sent Alexander away so that his men could come here, to this house, to this room, to Alexander's daughter, and to me. I grab Sophia and I run. Through the concealed door behind the bookshelf, into the darkness of the escape tunnel, my hand gripping hers so tightly I fear I might hurt her, but I cannot make myself let go. Behind us, I hear the safe room door buckling under assault, hear voices shouting commands in words I cannot process, because every fragment of my consciousness is focused on one single imperative. Keep her safe, keep moving, keep running. The tunnel stretches ahead of us like a throat swallowing us whole, and I pray to any God listening that we will emerge from the other side still breathing. The tunnel spits us out into darkness and cold air and the sharp scent of pine needles, and I pull Sophia behind a fallen oak before my legs give out entirely. Every breath is a knife between my ribs, and I know something is broken inside me, can feel the grinding wrongness with each expansion of my lungs, but I cannot stop now, cannot rest, cannot do anything except keep this child alive until help arrives. Sophia is shaking against me, her small body racked with tremors that have nothing to do with the cold, and I know she saw what happened back in the tunnel when those two men cornered us at the junction point. I used everything Alexander taught me in those training sessions that felt like foreplay, every block and strike and desperate survival technique, and when the first man grabbed for Sophia, I felt something shift inside me, some final barrier between the woman I was and the woman I needed to become. I took his gun while he was off balance, and I pulled the trigger, and I watched his face as the bullet found its home, and I felt nothing except the fierce primal satisfaction of protecting what was mine. The second man ran. Smart of him. I would have killed him too. Now Sophia looks at me with eyes that have seen too much, eyes that should still be innocent, and I sign to her with hands that will not stop trembling. We are safe. We are hiding. Help is coming. I do not know if any of it is true, but I need her to believe. I need to give her something to hold on to while the world burns around us. The burner phone Alexander gave me feels like a lifeline as I pull it from my pocket, and my blood leaves dark smears on the screen as I dial the only number programmed into its memory. Marcus answers on the second ring, and his voice is ragged with exhaustion and relief. Eleanor, where are you? I describe our location as best I can, the woods beyond the north perimeter, the fallen oak with the lightning scar, and he tells me to stay hidden, tells me he is coming, tells me Alexander is alive and fighting, and the operation at Victor's compound has become a bloodbath. I do not ask about casualties. I cannot carry any more grief right now. Sophia curls into me and I wrap my arms around her despite the screaming protest of my ribs, and we wait in the darkness while somewhere in the distance sirens wail and helicopters beat the air and the empire Alexander built either stands or falls. I think about the man I killed. I think about how easy it was once I stopped thinking about it at all. I think about who I am becoming in the crucible of this violence, and whether Eleanor Fairfax the schoolteacher still exists, or whether she burned away in the muzzle flash of a stolen gun. Sophia signs against my chest, small movements I feel more than see. I love you. I sign it back, bloody fingers forming the shape that started everything. We wait for rescue. We pray in our own ways. We survive. Marcus finds us in the gray light before dawn, his flashlight cutting through the darkness like a blade, and I have never been so grateful to see another human being in my entire life. He does not ask questions, does not waste time on words we cannot afford. He simply scoops Sophia into his arms and wraps his other arm around my waist to support my stumbling steps, and we move through the woods toward a vehicle hidden on an access road I never knew existed. The secondary safe house is a nondescript building in an industrial district, all concrete walls and barred windows, and the kind of anonymous ugliness that makes it invisible to anyone not looking for it. A doctor arrives within the hour, a woman with steady hands and no curiosity about the circumstances that led to my cracked ribs and the gash across my shoulder and the bruises blooming like dark flowers across my skin. She wraps me in bandages and gives me pills for the pain and tells me I am lucky to be alive, as if luck had anything to do with it. The next 2 days are an agony of waiting and healing and trying to keep Sophia distracted while my mind races through every possible outcome of the war Alexander is fighting somewhere beyond these walls. Marcus brings us news in fragments. Victor escaped the initial raid, but his compound is destroyed, his men scattered or dead, his empire crumbling around him. Alexander is hunting him personally now, tracking the man who tried to take everything from him, who sent men to steal his daughter, who would have killed us both without hesitation if given the chance. I should want Alexander to show mercy. I should hope for some peaceful resolution, some surrender, some ending that does not require more blood. But I find that I cannot summon that particular virtue anymore. Victor made his choices. He targeted a child. He deserves whatever Alexander does to him. On the evening of the second day, I hear vehicles arriving outside and my heart stops beating for one terrible moment before Marcus opens the door and Alexander walks through it. He looks like death warmed over, pale beneath the bruises, blood on his shirt that might be his or might belong to someone else, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. But he is alive. He is here. He is looking at me with eyes that hold everything he has never been able to say. Victor is dead, Marcus tells me quietly. But I barely hear him because Alexander is crossing the room and pulling me into his arms with a gentleness that contradicts everything I know about his capacity for violence. He sees my bandages, my bruises, the evidence of what I survived to keep his daughter safe, and I watch guilt flood his features like a tide coming in. I stop him before he can speak the apology I see forming on his lips. We survived. That is what matters. Sophia runs to her father then, throwing herself against his legs, and he kneels to gather her close, and I watch this broken family hold each other in the aftermath of everything that tried to destroy them. We are battered, we are scarred, but we are together, and for now, that is enough. The weeks that follow Victor's death blur together in a haze of healing and quiet transformation, and I find myself watching Alexander change in ways I never thought possible for a man who built his empire on violence and fear. He moves differently now, the coiled tension in his shoulders easing by degrees, the cold calculation in his eyes softening when he looks at Sophia, when he looks at me. I return to St. Catherine's School for the Deaf as soon as the doctor clears me to work, and there is something surreal about standing in my classroom again, teaching children their letters and colors and feelings in a language made of hands and hearts, as if the past months were some fever dream I only half remember. But Sophia sits in the front row with her bright eyes and her quick fingers, and when she signs good morning to me each day, I am reminded that all of it was real. Every terrifying, beautiful moment that led me from that first uneasy awareness of being watched to this strange new life I am building in the spaces between who I was and who I am becoming. I go home to the estate now. Home. The word catches in my throat the first time I think it, foreign and fragile and somehow exactly right. Alexander is dismantling the more violent aspects of his organization piece by piece, transitioning to legitimate business ventures that will never fully wash the blood from his hands but might at least stop adding fresh stains. It is not instant redemption, and I do not pretend it is. He is still the man who killed without hesitation to protect what was his. He is still feared throughout the city, still commands loyalty that borders on devotion from men who have done terrible things in his name. But he is also the man who sits with his daughter each evening practicing new signs, his scarred fingers forming words he spent 6 years unable to say. He is fluent now, his hands moving with a grace that surprises me every time I see him sign. And he no longer watches our lessons from doorways like a ghost haunting his own home. He joins us openly, sits beside Sophia on the floor of the sunroom, learns the songs I teach her, and laughs when he makes mistakes. I did not know he could laugh like that. My colleagues at the school ask about my new circumstances with careful curiosity, noting the expensive car that drops me off each morning, the security detail that lingers at a respectful distance, the ring finger that remains bare but somehow still speaks of belonging. I give vague answers about a complicated relationship and a family that needed me, and they are kind enough not to press. Some things are not for sharing. Some stories are too strange and too sacred to translate into casual conversation over coffee in the teacher's lounge. At night, Alexander and I lie tangled together in sheets that cost more than my old monthly rent, and we talk about futures neither of us expected to have. The storm is not over. It may never be completely over. But we are learning to build shelter in each other, and for now, that is everything. The evening air carries the scent of roses and something sweeter, something that might be jasmine or might simply be the smell of a world finally at peace. And I walk beside Alexander through the garden at the back of the estate toward the quiet corner where a marble headstone stands beneath an ancient oak tree. He has never brought me here before. This is sacred ground, the place where he buried his heart 6 years ago, alongside the woman who gave him Sophia, and gave up everything else in the process. I carry white lilies in my arms, flowers I chose this morning without knowing why, and when we reach the grave, I kneel to place them against the cool stone that bears a name I have only ever heard spoken in whispers. Catherine Ravenscroft, beloved wife and mother. Alexander stands behind me, his hand finding my shoulder, and I hear him speak to her in a voice I have never heard him use before, soft and broken and honest in ways he rarely allows himself to be. He tells her about Sophia, about how bright and brave their daughter has become, about the words she can say with her hands now, about the joy that fills her face when she learns something new. He tells her about me. I did not expect that. I did not expect him to introduce me to his ghost, to offer me to her memory like a gift he is not sure he deserves to give. But he does, and his words are simple and true, and when he finishes speaking, the silence that follows is not empty, but full, full of forgiveness. I think he has been waiting 6 years to receive. We stay there until the stars begin to emerge, and then Alexander takes my hand and turns me to face him. And in the dim light, I see something in his expression that makes my heart stutter and race. He reaches into his pocket and produces a ring, a band of white gold set with a single sapphire the color of Sophia's eyes, and he does not kneel because that has never been who he is. He simply holds it out to me like an offering, like a question, like a promise he is terrified I will refuse. Stay, he says. Be ours. Let me be yours. I think of everything that led me to this moment. The black SUV parked outside my school, the fear and the fury and the desperate fight for survival, the child who stole my heart before her father ever could. I think of the woman buried beneath our feet, the one who loved him first, and I hope she would approve of this strange new family being built on the foundation of her memory. My answer is not spoken. It does not need to be. I raise my hands and form the sign I taught him in that empty classroom a lifetime ago. The first words his daughter ever gave me. The phrase that started everything. I love you. He signs it back, his scarred and imperfect hands shaping the words with a grace that still surprises me. And when he slides the ring onto my finger, it feels like coming home. A movement in the doorway catches my attention, and I turn to see Sophia standing there in her pajamas, her dark hair tousled from sleep, her bright eyes taking in the scene before her. She smiles, that radiant, unburdened smile that first cracked open her father's frozen heart, and her small hands rise to form a single sign. Family. Alexander pulls us both into his arms, his daughter and his future wife, and I feel the words settle into my bones like a truth I have been searching for my entire life. The storm is not over. It may never be truly over. But we have found shelter in each other, and that is enough. That is everything.